Yeah, good. All right, Chuck. Well, it's good to have you here to share your story about the journey you've been on. I'm very interested and enticed around your literacy journey and how you spent a lot of time in corporate world and made a decision to shift your focus. So, kind of get things started off. Why did you choose to be on this journey that you're on?
Oh, you start right off with a hard question. It's funny because I don't think I really chose it, except I did kind of choose it at the beginning because when I was, let's say, 25, in the mid 20s, like I had no idea why anybody did anything. And so I thought to myself, who really understands the world? Who knows? Who really knows? And I said to myself, people running companies, because a group of people put them in charge. So they must really know what's going on. And so I, like read things like Tom Peters in Search of Excellence, and I followed corporate leaders, and I read the Wall Street Journal. And through a very odd series of events, I became the president of Amana Refrigeration when I was 35.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and it was a, nice company, and the world was shifting. And so we needed to combine it with two other companies that had historically been competitors. And when I announced to my staff that that's what we wanted to do, they said, no, we don't want to do that. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? They don't want to do it. And somebody handed me Peter Senge's uh, the fifth discipline in creating the learning organization. And that led me to Margaret Wheatley and leadership in the new science. And I was all in. I thought, oh boy, things are really going to change. I mean, there's a whole different way of doing things, and life's going to be amazing. And frankly, uh, things did work for a while. Um, I mean, we got the merger completed, and sales were up, and profits were up, and my corporate owners were applauding me. Of course, I thought I was a genius, and Peter Senge was a genius. Uh, but my corporate bosses wanted me to do stupid things, and I refused. And I could go into great detail as to why they were stupid, but they were really stupid. And I refused. And as my brother says, my future was freed up for me because there was a difference of opinion, and I had the opinion and they had the stock. So, um, being kind of at loose ends, I started teaching at the University of Iowa. And through that, met reading researchers at the University of Iowa. And they had developed some pretty effective approaches in teaching reading. And I was encouraging to them, but said I really didn't know what I could do to help them. But their major investor wanted me to be the CEO. And I said, well, I don't know anything about this. And they said, yeah, but you know about running companies. And so these are researchers and they need somebody who can help run a company. So I got thrown into the reading wars. I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but
Yeah.
for 30 years, people argued about, well,
Mnemonics.
oh, and arguing about everything. But I did meet leading reading researchers at the time, and I thought, oh, this is a pretty straightforward thing, and things are going to improve greatly. We ended up selling that company to a subsidiary of the Chicago Tribune, and our major investor was a media company. And right after the sale, I was asked to go back into the appliance business at Maytag to help them do an acquisition. But the media company said, "Hey, what are you doing? We want you to run the media company." And I said, I don't know anything about that. You know, I read newspapers and I watch TV. And they said, well, yeah, but you know about combining companies because you did that at Amana. And that's what we have to do. So I went into the media business, an unusual media business because it was owned by a family and had newspaper and television in the same market. So that made it pretty unusual in the United States. And while trying to figure out the media business, um, which was under significant stress because when I joined in 1998, that's when the internet had just come out and people were wondering what to do. But then in 2008, our community suffered the fourth worst public disaster in US history, a raging flood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that destroyed 10 square miles in the center of the city. If you can imagine all the things that would be in the center of a river town, all, you know, government buildings and retail and human services and cultural institutions. And because of my role in the community, I was asked to host a meeting led by the Commerce Secretary, Gutierrez at the time. And he said, literally put his arm around me and said, you know, we have money for individuals and we have money for government, but we don't have any money for businesses. I can't send you any money, but I can send you my best and brightest. And he sent two men from the Economic Development Administration, Sandy Barua and Ben Arukar, and they came and wanted a small meeting. So I represented the business community. There were two county supervisors and a city council member. So just six of us at a small table. And they said, look, you know, we know you're grieving and we know you want to get back what you had as quickly as possible. And we are here begging you not to do that. We are on our hands and knees begging you because you don't even realize it, but you are one of the most prosperous areas in the world. You have this amazing economy that's almost recession proof. Yet, now that you've had this fourth worst public disaster, you're on our radar. But your prosperity is because you were living into a narrative that was created by six white men on the prairie trying to solve the problem of material want on the frontier. And you've had a nice run materially doing that for 150 years, but that's not the game going forward. The game going forward is how do you create truly inclusive and sustainable communities locally, connected globally? That's the game. And in playing that game, political boundaries don't matter. It's only natural regions. So figure out your natural region, and your natural region is clearly in the Chicagoland region, and you should have as strong a local region as possible and get it connected to other regions. And that really struck me, and I was all in and thought we as a media company needed to lead the transition to this new narrative. And we also had the economic collapse at the time and a whole bunch of other issues. So we struggled, frankly. And then probably 3 or 4 years into that struggle, I happened to be in a diner in Colorado, and there was no room in the diner. And they said, well, you want to sit at the community table? We can seat you right away. So I sat at the community table, and in the middle of that table was the book Community by Peter Block, very dog-eared copy. So while I was waiting for my food, I picked it up and thought, oh, this is interesting. So I read it, and my wife read it, and friends read it. And we thought, wow, this is proactive community building. We could really be doing some stuff here. And one of the people I work with said, well, we got to figure out who else cares about this. So he kind of put out an all points bulletin to meet in a coffee shop at a time when I was out of town. And when I came back, he said, "Oh my God, you've got to meet this nun at Prairie Woods, the Eco Spirituality Center north of town. She's like your sister. She loves Peter Block. She loves him so much, she's invited him to come to town. And he's going to bring his new friend, Walter Brueggemann. And we got to get these guys, you know, I don't know exactly how old they are, but they're over 70, you know, and we got to get them into Cedar Rapids and have some energy to do this thing. And I said, well, I'm a pilot. I'll go pick them up. So I flew to Cincinnati, had dinner with Peter and Walter and Peter Pula, who had driven down from Canada to join the crew. And we laughed for about 24 hours. And I thought, how are these guys going to give this serious presentation to these nuns, you know, and all this community? And many people who were there comment on walking into that room with 540 people with circles of 6 and the instructions to find 5 people you don't know and sit with them. And Walter opened with all of human history is the resolution of conflicting narratives. Yet at this time and place, we're so committed to one narrative, we're almost losing our ability to even imagine alternative narratives, you know, let alone resolve the differences. And thankfully, I was able to fly back with Walter and be able to tell him that driving home that night, the narratives of my life were crystal clear, yet none were compelling. Right? In my first narrative was have fun. And then as a young man, I suffered a severe head injury. So the next narrative was recover. And then we had children. And the next narrative was provide. And then I'm on this media company and we have this disaster. And so the next narrative is help the community recover. But in that meeting, in that community meeting, there was an exercise, walk towards the poster on the wall that is attractive to you. And they were the posters of things that affect the community, you know, like government, transportation, healthcare, education. I walked towards education and found 5 people I didn't know, sat with them, and they were all elementary school teachers, each of them, and they didn't know each other. And they just kind of slumped into their seats and they said, you know, this has been so wonderful to be able to have authentic conversations. I can't do that in my school. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought, you got to be kidding me. We need to have people who are open to creating and living into new narratives. And you as their teacher can't even be your authentic self. And they said, no, we're just frantically trying to meet conflicting external demands. We can't really pay attention to the children and their individual needs, and they are not learning to read. So that started a quest for me. And I'll stop there to see if you have any other questions, but that started the beginning of the quest, right? Yeah. The quest of the last dozen years.
Wonderful.
When you said they asked you to do things you were unwilling to do,
Yeah.
could you just give us one as an example?
Oh
In
my
a
goodness.
general way without blaming anybody, because I'm sure you.
Oh yeah. Okay, so based on Peter Senge's work, we were all about purpose and principles, shared purpose. And in doing this merger, we had to change the way we went to market. which meant we had to change our relationship with dealers. So a person on the ground in a state, which will not should be named, was dealing with a dealer and doing what we asked them to do. We're doing what the salesperson was asked to do. The dealer didn't like it. And so he called the CEO of Raytheon and said, these guys are stupid. Don't change. Don't make me change. And so he called me to say, you know, make the salesman act differently. And I said, I can't do that. My God, we're trying to get everybody on this new program. The salesman works for a sales manager in the state. He works for a general manager in the state. He works for a branch manager. I would be skipping like 6 or 7 levels and telling somebody to not do what we asked them to do. I can't do that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There were many others, but that's a
No,
good.
it gives us a genre.
Yeah.
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 And as I was listening to you, Chuck, for the different points and milestones as you made choices to move to different organizations, you said several times your first inclination was, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
What did you learn as not knowing? What did you need to know? How would that play in your journey?
Wow. Thank you. So so I was trained as a lawyer. Okay. And after the head injury, I had a hard time with complicated fact patterns. So I became a corporate lawyer, very structured. You get the rules, you follow the rules. Okay. Corporate tax and reorganization. And because of that, I met people at Amana Refrigeration. And they asked me to come out and be their general counsel. Okay, that's not such a big stretch, right? But then there were a couple of issues, one of which was federal energy standards, which meant that we had to redo the way we made every refrigerator. And just give an order of magnitude, Amana was, started with a shoestring with one guy. It was purchased by Raytheon for $10 million. And then they invested $8 million in making a microwave oven. Okay, that's order of magnitude. To redo the refrigeration line was over $100 million. So I went to the meeting. Oh, well, I should have said, the CEO knew we needed a new strategy, so he asked me to be the strategic planner. In that role, I went to the meeting about refrigeration, and the meeting did not go well. Literally a lot of angry words and throwing things. I mean, with the context of 10 million, 8 million to 100 million. And the vice president of engineering, I should say that, the vice president of operations had a heart attack that night. And so I was asked to step in while he recovered. And then he came back and said, life's too short, I'm not coming back. So when I was asked to take over operations, I said, well, I don't know anything about running factories or, labor standards or all this stuff. And the CEO said, well, we got people who know about that stuff. We need $100 million. And you're the spokesperson for that. So that was that one. And then when the CEO retired and I was asked to take over, it was because we had good marketing people, we had good financial people, and the issue was combining these companies, and they thought I had the capability to do that. But one of the biggest shifts was when, I thought I was relatively successful. Sales were growing and profits were growing and blah, blah, blah. And so when I went to do this company on early reading, I thought I know stuff, right? I mean, right, I'm an accomplished person. I know stuff. And I was it took a long time to realize I really didn't know. You know, I mean, there's a whole different world between appliance dealers and first grade teachers. Yeah. And then all the complications of reading and that. Yeah.
Let me ask a question,
Yeah.
Chuck. What did these people see in you?
You know, I think they saw openness and connection. You know, I was open to listening and I made connections. Yeah. That's
Wise people, even
yeah.
though they all were ultimately disappointed.
Right. Thank you. And last but not least, so then when the media opportunity came, I thought, oh God, I can help create a learning organization that'll be a seed for the whole community. Wow, this is going to be great. And then the journalists didn't want anything to do with it. You know, that's not what, oh no, that was not their deal. That's not why they signed up. That's not what they were taught. No, no, no. You're a complete blank slate that reports what occurred with a heavy emphasis towards prominence, recency, and conflict. Right. Or disaster or fear or whatever. Yeah.
You said that
Yeah.
they, some point you talked about fear. And I'm looking for the quote, they threw anger and fear into the community.
Yeah.
But there was a beautiful encapsulation of how we've constructed news and journalism.
Yeah. Well, and the general theory, you know, is that the news organizations to hold the powerful accountable. So watch out, they're doing this, they're doing that. And it's not, there's a role for that, you know, if the mayor's committing fraud, you don't want to have a small group discussion with the mayor about it. You want to bring it to the light of day. But in having a community sense, you know, what it is that they want to do. So so I mentioned, you know, after this session with the Prairie Woods and with the teachers, I became just really focused on how can we have a system where kids are learning to read and people are having fun. I mean, or at least smiling, you know, the able to have authentic conversations in their school. And in that quest, I also attended other Prairie Woods events. They have these events every year. They bring in interesting speakers. And one of them was a nun, Gail Warcello, who founded the Green Mountain Monastery with Thomas Berry. And she said a lot of things, but one of the things two of the things she said that really struck me were, she said, I hate this. I wish this were not the case, but you cannot co-create with someone captured in fear. And so how does a person get in touch with their authentic self? And she said, I only know 3 ways. One is to have some traumatic event. Doesn't have to be a negative traumatic event. It could be a positive one like falling in love, but some traumatic event. Or engage with an authentic community and have it rub off on you. Or develop a practice of contemplation and reflection and to get in touch with your authentic nature. And as you do that, as you become more authentic and less fear-based, you are going to be struck with how fear dominates most institutions. And you are going to be sorely tempted to reform them. And I submit to you, that's a waste of your time and energy. Find a place of joy and construct from there. So in bopping around talking to people about education through a very odd series of events, which would take longer than you guys want to talk about, I ended up visiting a school in inner city London. And as I entered the door, I noticed that over the main doorway was the word joy. And I learned later on that the school had been terrible. People who were there said, anybody who could be yelling was yelling, and no one was learning. And the police were called every day to an elementary school, right? And the government was going to rightly shut it down. But 3 women asked to try to keep it open. They were just trying to keep it open. And not only did they keep it open, it became one of the top schools in the UK. And, you know, the kids didn't change, parents didn't change, neighborhood didn't change. It was the leadership and the staff at the school that changed. So, of course, I asked them, what theories did you apply? And they just laughed at me. They said, oh my God, it was just utter chaos. We didn't have any time for theories. All we could do was sense and respond. And that really struck me. And I had other people with me in visiting the school. And we worked on some videos and wrote a paper about the school. And we were trying to distill the essence. It was wholeness and agency. And wholeness in that we recognize that we are connected to everything. And we have agency, that we can take the moment of freedom and decide. We can keep all our senses open, as connected as possible. We can take that moment of freedom and decide. So I got a reputation in London as being a documentarian of education. So I was asked to come to the House of Lords and speak on this topic. And the Lord who organized the event asked a handful of us, like 5 of us, interesting, we're back to circles of 6, but asked 5 of us to come and have tea with him in the Lord's tea room. Very, very fancy place. And I happened to be sitting just, you know, just next to him. And right away, he put me on the spot. And at the time, he was about 75 years old, and he just pointed his finger at me and, what is the essential issue? And I was on the spot, you know, I never really, and so I said, well, we are using ineffective methods within too limited a cosmology. And he did not skip a beat. I'm going to introduce you to a cosmologist. And I said, when? He said, April 8th. I said, oh, I can't on April 8th because I promised my son I'd help him pull his tiny house from Iowa to Seattle. And he said, no problem. I'll make an electronic introduction, which he did, which was to Jude Currivan, who had just written a book called The Cosmic Hologram. And she said, no problem. I'm making a presentation in Chicago in May. Let's have lunch. So that started the last 7+ years of conversation around how to make this unitive perspective more accessible. And so that has been a thread as well. It's really a continuation of the work of David Bohm and the implicate order, that everything arises out of one underlying connected wholeness. Yeah. So
You use the term, Chuck, the undivided nature of reality.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that, as the essence of what a cosmology is?
Yeah. And so I like many people talk about how everything's connected, right? I mean, there's things and they're all connected. And what David Bohm was trying to describe is, well, there's an underlying field of possibilities out of which everything arises.
Hmm.
So everything is connected at that level, right? That's the undivided nature of reality. And it's a complete mystery. Like, I like the line, somebody said, anybody who says they understands this doesn't, right? But it's just acknowledging that there's more going on than we can perceive, right? So we are limited perceivers. That's the deal we have. And we can get past a lot of that by being in authentic conversation in place over time. But we can't get past the fundamental mystery. I mean, you still have to acknowledge that.
Yeah. You talked, Chuck, about the underlying field of possibilities, which just brought a lot of things for me. And
Yeah.
I think in our earlier conversations, you also talked about a generative field. Can you
Mhm.
speak a little bit about the generative element that goes with that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I first noticed it in conversations that occurred in Cedar Rapids after Peter came to visit. That when you get a circle of 6 together and people are expressing authentically what's coming up for them in the moment, then they can see possibilities that they couldn't see when they first sat down together. That's like the basic of the generative field. But where I've really seen it powerful, I first saw it in the school in London. And, I made a bunch of videos about it. I think I've given you, Jeff, a link to those videos and the efforts of Jude Currivan and others in something called The Whole World View to explain that unitive narrative. But what I saw in London was the staff, by staying in authentic conversation in place over time, then develop places they never could have imagined at the beginning. And then because of that work, I was asked to go to Floyd, Virginia, and visit an intergenerational learning community called Springhouse. And they had been sitting in what they call depth circle for 90 minutes to 2 hours a week. And the shortest time period of anybody was like 5 years. And the longest was 8 or 9 years. I mean, the staff. And it's just amazing what they develop by being in that generative community in place over time. So I have a lot of hope for that, for bioregions. That if you really had people in authentic community in a defined natural place, better decisions could be made, life could be livelier and healthier.
We do that now, but they're called staff meetings. So no more time is required.
Right, exactly, right, thank you. But just like a different approach, yeah, and that's what don't get me started. Yeah, so in the community of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, well, the technical city is like 120,000 to 150,000, but the region's about 500,000. And the amount of money that we spent in that group of people spinning, organizations spinning their story, and the media trying to pierce that spin. Oh my God, just start from a different place, Start from authenticity and transparency and see what happens. And
That's beautiful. I mean, so Sometimes I think the corner office, which is a shorthand of the jobs you took till now,
Mhm.
all they do is spin. Most of their time is spent spinning. A friend of mine was a chief of staff for Al Gore. He had one job, was to collect and decide what news would be released at what time of day, every day of the week.
Yeah,
You're saying that the
Yeah.
money spent on spinning, to me, is a very powerful sentence. Wow.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I mean, there are a lot of people who are working to, make something different happen. I mean, not just the people I mentioned, like Jenny Finn at Springhouse, but um, Bill Veltrop, who was very active in large organizational development for decades, now is trying to develop life-affirming systems. Robert Gilman and the Context Institute, how do we enter more into a planetary era? Ann Adams and Meg Henshaw and Jeff Steck, Peter, who I think you know from Cincinnati, are working on something called the Alliance to Transform Education, to transform education more into a holistic individual thriving enterprise as opposed to a compliance. I mean, I don't know how well or much you follow this, but only about 40% of the 8th graders in the US read proficiently. Only about 40%. And the longer that students are in the system, the lower their hope and engagement and the higher their anxiety and depression. So like we're losing in every which way today. When you consider the Gallup's longitudinal study that showed that hope and engagement are the greatest predictors of life happiness and success, and grades and standardized test scores are slightly negatively correlated. What are we doing, right? There's got to be a complete rethinking. And one of the people calling for a big rethinking is Will Richardson at the Big Questions Institute. Yeah.
I think what also struck me was you identified the leverage point, which you said was fluency, automatic word recognition,
Right.
and becoming a fluent reader. And you said if they're not, they see themselves as a people who cannot finish.
Right.
I thought that was such a powerful spotlight of language.
Thank you. The researchers that I met 30 years ago were working with little kids, and they now, recently, I say now, last 5 or 10 years, they got grants to study middle school students and figure out why they're not able to read. And mostly it's because of very fundamental issues that should have been covered when they were 5 or 6 or 7 years old. So they have developed a process called Word Flight, really easy to find, wordflight.com. And yeah, and when I went to visit students who were using that program, these are like 13 and 14-year-old students, they were able to articulate, I had never finished anything, right? I could not read, and I did not view myself as a learner. And now I've been doing this for 6 months, and all of those are reversed, right? It's like, oh my God, right? But I have to tell you that one of the biggest problems with Word Flight is because people do not believe it's possible, right? They've tried everything. These kids just can't learn. We don't know. We've tried everything. Well, yeah, you've tried everything of pushing things at them. Try to get what?
Pedagogy.
Yeah. But can you create an environment in which they get to explore and get what they need and make the connections themselves? It just changes everything. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
No.
The essence of
No.
agency is what you're talking about, Chuck.
Yeah, thank you.
Essence of agency in the young kids that they never saw before, right?
Yeah.
I've read where if the child doesn't have this fluency by the third grade, it's really hard to catch up.
Yes.
80% of the people in prisons,
yeah,
do not have this fluency.
Right. And yes, which is why, even though they did their research in middle school, and it's a great surgical intervention in middle school. If you're really going to do it well, you would be testing these kids at the end of second grade or beginning of third grade. Oh, you're not getting it? Okay, here. So you just avoid that whole trap. And yeah. So other questions?
You've shared so much, Chuck, and just is there anything you would want to add on this journey? Surprises that have kind of come to you, and then also maybe as you look forward, what are you looking for? So surprises that you've seen would be useful. Yeah.
Okay, so surprises. The big surprise is for decades, I thought the way to do things was to make things up, and often make things up in a small room with a small group of people, develop the plan, and then impose that plan on hundreds or thousands of people. Right. That was the methodology. And frankly, time flies, but it was now 9 years ago. I read a book by Ilia Delio called The Unbearable Wholeness of Being. And that book struck me so hard that I was not playing my role in the universe, that I really needed to sense what was alluring to me and act accordingly, take that moment of freedom. And that was really hard at the start. But I have been so surprised at what has come out of that. You just can't imagine how did this happen? How did this connection happen? Why am I doing this? It's just one thing after another by following that lead of allurement. And my frustration level is way lower than it was when I was making stuff up and then trying to convince others. So my line now is I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything.
But that small group deciding what's best has a name. It's called management.
Yeah. So
it's amazing I have there's a school in Cincinnati embodying what you're talking about. And then in the last while, the board has begun to question this leadership style. How do you understand that all their results are visible? Literacy, they eliminated expulsions, restorative practices, which is another version. How do you think about why there's often a pushback?
Yeah, that's a story I hear frequently. Well, the common pattern is parents are all for having their children thrive until they're about 14 or 15. And then it's okay, let's get into Harvard or whatever, right? I mean, that's a very common pattern. And so when when you're trying to do things outside the boundaries, yet the need for it is so great. We need to have people who can who can make up and live into a different way of being. And I don't think we're not making up some complicated new thing. We're more remembering. We're more remembering what our capabilities are. Yeah. So Jeff, you asked about what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. What's the future? What's on
Yeah.
the horizon for it?
Well, the big thing that people are talking about a lot is I'm going to get married this year. So even though my granddaughter tells me I'm too old to get married, we're on a path to do that. So that's exciting. And I'm really excited to see what WordFlight can do as it gets out more in the market. It's just been out for a couple years, and we're now starting to see people who've used it, who see the power of it. And so I'm excited about that. And then Springhouse, which was an intergenerational learning community primarily focused on teenagers and young adults, has moved both ways. They've moved lower to 5-year-olds to teenagers. They've also moved older for older adults. But what's most exciting to me is they're moving into the community, helping to call community gatherings to create those generative fields in the community. So I'm really interested to see how that works. It's a small enough community that I think there's real possibility. Yeah. Yeah.
One other question.
Yeah.
In the last 8 years, as you've left running institutions,
Yeah.
who supported you in that 8-year journey?
Oh,
Sent you
boy.
to London, sent you to.
Oh, that's all private support. That's me. That's physically, I mean, physically or financially. But support came from close friends who smiled and said they were seeing progress. My significant other, Laura Stewart,
Your fiance,
who's been, yes, thank you, who's been a huge supporter and cheerleader.
you had a circle, right? You had a
Yeah.
circle of friends.
Yeah. And right. Yes. And people, from the early days, Peter Pula and Ben Smith and Jennifer Wilson, Jan Hillary at St. George's, and Jude Caravan and her whole team. Just a lot of support. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Peter, you and the sessions that you would do. Yeah.
You have an amazing capacity for theoretically somebody who did not handle up abstract ideas. After your brain was destroyed. You have a poetic capacity to capture complicated things in very accessible ways.
Thank you.
Wow. I mean, even hearing this again, it's just beautiful and poetic. And I think you are, our job is to, I don't know, take these incidents and realize how important they are. And I'm tired of being an anomaly.
Yeah.
David Cayley told John and I once, he says, you guys are honored and ignored. And that's beautiful. I also, I'm thinking, I'd love to make a column out of this for something. And I think I will call it Dearly Departed. And I think there's something about people who have succeeded in the existing, ungenerative world, who then choose to step away or are invited to step away. That, I don't know, it brought something together for all of us. You succeeded, departed, and then got curious.
Well, thank you. Although I would say, much like the Fed said about Cedar Rapids, I may have succeeded materially, but I was miserable.
Yes.
I was miserable. I was trying to play games that other people had defined. I was not present for my wife and family. Yeah, so I do not view that time as an overall success. But
Yeah.
the
that's
but the material success gave me the opening to try something different.
Yeah, and but that's, I think, what your point is, that even though at 14, the parents want to get into a good school, they do them no service, especially if they're successful. And I think that's very powerful. We started an urban hip hop center here for the age of 14 to 24 urban kids, because that was the era, that was the age that we don't know what to do with them.
Mhm.
And just to reinforce it, when we asked them how many adults have your well-being on your side, the answer was 0 and 1.
Wow.
And what you're doing with these generative cultures is these kids not only are in a circle, but now they have adults that are on their side. And that's
Yeah. Thank you.
anyway, this is amazing.
I know we're close to our time, folks, and it's just and Chuck, just so many things for me around the underlying field of possibilities that we're tapping into. I'm just going to keep that stays, and
Yeah.
and just this time together, I've experienced hope and engagement, and I think that's a key piece. That how do we so as maybe not as a final part, because I hope there's not a finality to our conversation, but as others listen to this message and your journey, what would you like to leave them with of out there? And Peter, we've mentioned about this is countercultural. This is not necessarily the way, but we come alive with it. What message around hope, engagement, or anything that you would leave with folks that are intrigued with the journey?
Really pay attention to how the myth of separation has captured you. Just really attend to that. I still work on that every day because the patterns are so deep.
Yes.
We could have another conversation about the mythology we live within.
Mhm.
The myth of development is another powerful myth. And that's beautiful. The myth of separation.
The stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks again, Chuck, for your
Yeah.
engagement here and more importantly, your commitment to the literacy and the future of our generation. So thank you so much.
Yep,
Peter,
thank you.
Leslie, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
That's twice. One more time, we'll start to get it.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.